Hey everyone, I'm here today to film the Nature Writing Naturally tag. This is an original tag created by Emma at A Cup of Books and Natalie at Curious Reader. I was tagged to do this by Doris at Aldi Books. And this tag is associated with the Springathon Readathon, which is coming up the 1st of May. It actually goes from May 4th till 2 weeks from then. I can't remember the actual dates. I will link the announcement video down below for Springathon, as well as Doris's take on this tag and Emma's take on this tag. This is a fantastic tag. You all know that I love to read nature nonfiction or science-related nonfiction. And if you have seen Doris's version of this tag, we have a lot of the same favorite books, so you're going to see some repeats here, but I've tried to pick out different books that either I haven't talked about recently or Doris didn't talk about in her video. But there will be some overlap because it just can't be helped because these are great books. So I'm just going to get right into this. Number one, what's your favorite nature writing book or author? And my favorite nature writing book and author is Lab Girl by Hope Jaron. This is a fabulous memoir of a woman who just tells the whole story of how she became a scientist. She studies plants and soil, and it details her journey from a young student all the way through running her own lab, her friendship with her lab partner, and other aspects of her personal life. I think this is an amazing, amazing book. And I love it. It's in my top 10 nonfiction reads ever. And I've talked about it so many times. I don't need to go over it too much here, but if you have not yet read Lab Girl, please do read it. It is so excellent. Question 2, recommend a book about plants. Well, besides Lab Girl, which is about plants, I am going the same route as Doris, and I am recommending both of David George Haskell's books. The first one I read was The Forest Unseen, where he takes an entire year and studies a square meter of forest floor, basically. And so for each month, he has basically an essay on all the stuff that's related to that meter of forest in Tennessee. And he does bring in, and he does bring in so many different aspects of science and nature and environmentalism and just all of the topics. He's such a beautiful writer. These books are amazing. The second book we read by him was The Songs of Trees, and this is more general about trees and forests and the environment and our connection with nature. And it's, again, just so lyrically written. David George Haskell is an amazing nature writer. Definitely highly recommend these books. And I'm also going to add, so those are all books that I have read that I would recommend for being about plants. I also want to note what I'm going to read myself for my TBR. For the prompt for plants, I'm very excited to be reading Hope Jaron's new book. This is the story of more, how we got to climate change and where to go from here. You see the tree on the cover, so definitely meets the prompt for plants. And I am super, super excited to read this book. Actually, Doris just told me a couple weeks ago that this book had been released. I didn't even know that there was a new book by Hope Jaron in the offing. So thrilled. I immediately ordered it and I can't wait to read it for the readathon. Let me find a place to stick that. Okay, question 3, recommend a book about animals. So I am going to recommend 2 books that I've already read. This is The Soul of an Octopus, a surprising exploration into the wonder of consciousness by Cy Montgomery. You probably will have heard of this. This is Cy Montgomery's basically, again, another combination memoir and science writing all about octopi and their surprising amount of intellectual capability and connection with the humans that they interact with. I found this book fascinating. For some reason, I just wasn't interested in it for the longest time. And then I got a really good deal on this copy of the book on Book Outlet one day. And then when I picked it up, I just absolutely sped through it. Absolutely loved it. Cy Montgomery is a great writer. Highly recommend. I also want to recommend Sound of a Wild Snail Eating by Elizabeth Tova Bradley, I think. I will put a picture of it up here. Again, another combination of memoir and nature writing, this time all about a woman who contracts some kind of mysterious virus that makes her bedridden for over a year. And during that time that she's bedridden, a friend of hers brings in a snail that she's found outside. They put it in a terrarium, and then the author observes this snail and basically ruminates on life and the life of a snail. It is absolutely one of the most beautiful books I've ever read in my life. I love that book so much. I wish I had a physical copy of it. I read it on ebook, and I think it is an amazing book. And I never hear hardly anyone talk about it, and it's such a good book. If you're interested in that sort of combination of nature and memoir, I would very much recommend The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating. Now for my TBR, what I'm going to be reading for the animal prompt, I am going to be reading How to Catch a Mole, Wisdom from a Life Lived in Nature by Mark Hammer. I think the first person I heard talk about this was Mercedes over at Mercy's Bookish Musings. And it's a slim little novel all about a guy who his job was to trap rodents, basically. And it's his sort of thoughts and feelings about that job and nature and all of the stuff I love. Basically, again, memoir and nature together. Definitely a pattern here. So I'm going to be trying to get to that one during the readathon. Question 4 is recommend a book about water or the sea. And you guys know this is another favorite topic of mine, but I'm going to go a little bit off the beaten path for my recommendations and recommend 2 graphic novels or picture books. This is Sea Soup Phytoplankton, and the author is Mary Sorello, and the photographer is Bill Kurtzinger. And I have met this photographer, and a lot of the photographs in this book were taken in my area, in the North Atlantic or here where I live. There's a picture of a phytoplankton. That's a copepod right there. Here's a phytoplankton here. Let's see, what else do we have? These are just awesome books, all about the ocean and about microscopic creatures that live in the water. And then that was the first book that they put out together. And then they put out this one, Life Under Ice. And just what it says on the tin, it's all about Arctic oceans and what is under the sea in the Arctic. Also some beautiful pictures of penguins and such like. These books are informative, but also the photography is just amazing. Look at this picture of this penguin. Isn't that awesome? So highly recommend those. And then for myself, for what I'm going to be reading or trying to get to for my TBR is The Seaweed Chronicles, A World at the Water's Edge by Susan Hand Shetterly. This is a book all about rockweed, and it also takes place in Down East Maine, which is where I live. This one has been on my radar for quite a while. I finally got a copy of it, and it's, again, another little slim novel. Slim book. And I'm very much looking forward to checking this one out. Plus it correlates with my job. So it actually is information I'd like to get into my brain for that purpose. Question 5, recommend a book about birds. I don't read too much about birds. I want to change that, but I haven't to this point read too much about birds. And so I'm going to make another plug for these collections, The Best American Science and Nature Writing. These come out once a year. The editor for this 2017 collection was Hope Jaron. And these are a collection of all different kinds of science and nature writing articles that were first published in different periodicals and then pulled together annually by different editors. And they are about different topics. And you can see that I have marked some favorites. And one that I just want to call your attention to is written by Tom Philpott, and it was originally published in Mother Jones. And this particular article was How Factory Farms Play Chicken with Antibiotics. And it's all about industrial chicken farming and how antibiotics are used and misused in that industry for the purpose of enhancing and speeding up growth, but what the side impacts and effects of that are. This was a fascinating, fascinating article. And that's just one example of the kinds of articles that are in these collections. And so they would touch on topics of all of these prompts: plants, animals, birds, water, land, whatever. So highly, highly recommend these Best American Science and Nature Writing collections. If you're into essays and you like science writing, these are just amazing. And they come out every year in October. And then for my TBR, I am going to be reading off my e-reader. I have The Genius of Birds by Jennifer Ackerley. And this is a book that I've had on my Kindle for years and have been wanting to read it. And for whatever reason, I just never reach for an ebook unless it's because I'm doing it for a particular purpose. So I feel like a TBR for a readathon is just the boost that I need to get myself into reading that ebook that I've wanted to read for a long time. Then for 6, recommend a book about travel. I'm going a little bit off center here with this one, but I think this is a beautiful book. This is The Hour of Land, A Personal Topography of America's National Parks by Terry Tempest Williams. This is a beautiful book. It has this nice wrap and then, of course, beautiful imagery there. And this nice hardcover has, it has photographs that mark off each section. And this is all about Terry Tempest Williams' connections with different American national parks. So there's stuff in here about Acadia National Park, which is in Maine. There's stuff about Big Bend. There's stuff about Grand Teton, Gettysburg, just all different kinds of national parks in the United States. And Terry Tempest Williams' writing is absolutely beautiful. If you love beautiful lyrical nature writing, I think you could not go wrong with picking up this book by Terry Tempest Williams, and it's just lovely. And this is the book that made me want to visit every single national park in America. So definitely love that book. And then for myself, for my TBR for this readathon, I am going to be reading The Salt Path by Raynor Winn. This is a book about a woman and her husband who walk the Southwest Path, which is in the southwest part of England. It goes from Somerset to Dorset through Devon and Cornwall. So you guys know, if you've been watching, that I had been meant to be traveling to Cornwall in May. That trip sadly is off, obviously, but I'm still very excited to read this travel memoir of somebody walking the Southwest Path, the Southwest Coast Path, excuse me. I just am so fascinated with this part of the world, and I think this is going to give me a good picture of what the scenery and the landscape and all that's going to look like, plus with memoir, which you guys know I love. So question 7 is, what nature writing book on your TBR are you most excited about? I've got to say the Hope Jaron. I am so thrilled that another book has come out from her. I just love her so much. And then 8 is, what nature writing book are you most excited about that you don't have access to? And that's a book that's been recommended several times by Natalie at Curious Reader, and it's Corvus by Esther Wolfson. Like I said, I haven't read that much about birds, and some of the stuff I've read about birds I haven't loved, but the way that Natalie talks about this book, Corvus, it makes it sound fascinating. Plus that I'm really interested in crows. They're such an intelligent bird. My niece actually wrote a paper about how birds in that crows, basically how they use tools and problem solve, and that has always left me quite fascinated with crows. So I definitely want to read Corvus, and at some point I'm going to get my hands on a copy of that book, but I have not yet been able to find it. Question 9 is, why do you love nature writing? I love nature writing because I love nature, obviously. My job has to do with nature. I live in a part of the world that's very much rural. I feel most at home in a rural environment. I love being outside. I love being surrounded by nature. I love the sea most of all, and it's where I'm happiest. But I will also say is and I've said this before in other videos, I'm a nosebag. And so I like to know how everything works. I am not satisfied with just somebody telling me this is how it is. I have to dig into the guts of something and find out why it is that way. I was the kid that read the encyclopedia for fun when I was younger, and everything about the outdoors and nature fascinates me. So that is why I love nature writing. Question 10, describe the nature around where you live. I live in down east Maine. I actually live in an area that's as far north on the east coast of the United States that you can go without being in Canada. So right on the border between Maine and Canada on the ocean. It's known as the down east part of Maine, and that has to do with the prevailing wind directions and how ships sailed back in the days of sailing ships. And so the nature around where I live, like I said, I live in a very rural environment. We only have very few people that live here. I live on the coast, and the coast where I live is a mixture of bold outcrop and intertidal clam flats. So you get a mixture of, rocky cliffs that are sort of iconic for Maine, and then also soft bottom habitat where you're going to find shellfish and all that sort of thing. So definitely make sure, and butting up against the sea are the evergreen forests of Maine. So we, mostly, pine, fir, spruce, cedar, those sorts of evergreens. And it's all mostly wooded. Very little open landscape. Like, you're not going to see big skies here unless you're on the seashore. Everything is crowded with trees and not people. And then the last one, number 11, shout out another channel. I would like to shout out and also tag Lori at Windsong Reads. She does a lot of nature writing. We share a lot of appreciation and love for the same science nonfiction books. I want to shout out Mercedes at Mercy's Bookish Musings and also tag her. She also loves nature writing. She doesn't read a lot of nonfiction, but the nonfiction that she does read, she very often reaches for nature nonfiction. So that's awesome. And she talks about it really brilliantly. I love her channel. And for a person who reads fiction nature writing, not so much nonfiction, but for fiction nature writing, I would shout out and tag Natalie from My Reading Days. She's Australian, and she really loves fiction books that have beautiful nature writing in them as well. And she's turned me on to a lot of great fiction with nature writing that I love. Most recently, Tim Winton, who is an Australian writer. So those are my answers to the what is it now? I've just shut my notes and I've forgotten. Nature Writing Naturally tag. I want to thank Doris for tagging me, and I want to thank Natalie and Emma for creating the readathon, and Emma for creating the tag questions. I'm very excited about the springathon, and I hope that you will all join in with me and read lots of nature-based books, be they nonfiction or fiction, and then tell me all about them so I can add more to my TBR, because I'm always looking for more books that have great nature writing in them. All right, everyone, I'll talk to you later.